Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today for another virtual weather meeting with Brian Bledsoe. I'm Scotty Yurgis, Director of Sales with Producer Ag. As we go into this, wanted to get one right before we head into the holidays to give people an update, a little bit of a Christmas update, Christmas outlook, and then also, as we head into later part of winter, early part of spring, of some things we could be looking for as we roll into this. So as always, feel free to text me for those that have my number. Type into the Q&A portion of this if you've got any virtual questions for Brian. Keep this interactive and feel free to pick his brain as we go. So with that, Brian, I will turn it over to you.
All right, very good. I'm going to share my screen here if I can find it. If we can go here, make sure everybody can see that. And it looks like we're good. You guys good on your end? You can see me okay?
We are good.
All right. So before we get into more of the seasonal element of what's been going on and what will go on, I want to address something that's going to take place over the next 48 hours or so, and it's going to be wind. There's going to be a pretty strong downsloping or Chinook event that's going to take place from southeast Wyoming along the Front Range of Colorado. We'll see a little bit of that wind kind of bleed its way eastward into parts of Kansas, but I'm more focused on the passage of the cold front that's going to take place later Wednesday and through the daytime hours on Thursday. So this is a wind gust forecast animation from midday Wednesday through the end of the day Thursday. And I'm going to let this cycle through a few times. So you can see that real strong pulse coming in northwest Kansas, and it kind of fades out. But by the middle part of the day on Thursday, we have another real strong pulse of wind come down from the north and the northwest. So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. Not everybody's going to see ridiculously strong wind, but I think the northwest part of the state certainly is going to have something to deal with late tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow night. And then the eastern, say 2/3 of the state, certainly are going to be under the gun during the daytime hours on Thursday. And you could see some of these numbers over 50 miles per hour, and even some locations could possibly exceed 60 miles per hour before this is all done later in the day on Thursday. So if you have any plans, if you have anything to, get secured or whatever, and you're in one of these higher wind gust profile areas, make sure you get that done. You really have about the majority of the day tomorrow to get that accomplished before we see that initial pulse come in northwest Kansas, and then the bigger pulse come in during the daytime hours on Thursday. It's that time of year, and ironically enough, I know a lot of us remember the tremendous wind event that happened back on December 15th in 2021. This won't be as high end of a wind event as that one was, where we had several different wildfires that we were having to deal with and tremendous amounts of blowing dirt, but this one still will be significant. And as you can see there will be some pretty high-end wind gusts as it makes its way through. So with that in mind, I want to talk now about what's going on for the past 30 days across the state of Kansas, which has actually been some really good news for a lot of areas. And you can see a lot of our precipitation anomalies are anywhere from, say, 100% above average to over 210% above average. And we've even got some higher end stuff, 235% of average right there, 252. There's a 235, and back here, I believe that's south of Colby, about 275. Now, not everybody has seen that kind of moisture. We obviously have a little corner here in the southeast portion of the state, which has been problematic, but overall, the state has been in pretty good shape regarding moisture through the course of the fall. With that in mind, Drought Monitor has basically been a non-event here recently. We still have some dryness that's focusing itself again across, say, the eastern quarter of Kansas right here. None of it is awful at this point, but the longer we go in this pattern, obviously we can see this abnormally dry or moderate drought conditions across the far east central part of the state go from bad to worse in a shorter period of time. And that's kind of what we're going to see happen, at least over the next couple of weeks. This weather pattern that we're dealing with right now is very inactive in terms of bringing storms in that could actually deliver us some moisture. We've got the cold front coming through tomorrow and Thursday, which is obviously going to produce wind, but it's coming through completely dry. So let's look at the next 2 weeks. This forecast precipitation anomaly map walks us through from today through the 23rd of December. And the thing to know about this brown shaded areas right there, if you are not in the negative 0.20 inches or lower, then you're not going to be shaded in brown. That doesn't mean that you're not going to be drier than average, however. And you could still see some of these, precipitation anomalies that are obviously below average continue all the way across the western part of Kansas. But certainly the farther east you go, you're used to getting more moisture than the far west. So that's why you're seeing some greater precipitation anomaly deficits there than maybe we otherwise would. And you can see that southeast corner is still going to be basically shut out, I think, at least over the next week or so. And temperatures are going to be really warm through this period too. I think initially the warmer than average, the highest end warmer than average anomaly is going to be situated across the western part of the state and westward up into Colorado, across the panhandles, and then into New Mexico. And then this is going to be a staple in our forecast, I really think, through the remainder of this year. And if we look at the precipitation anomaly forecast from the 23rd through the 30th, okay, you see basically the same story here. Maybe some of these anomalies are lesser, but I just don't see anything meaningful coming through right through the end of December, and probably even longer than that. That's going to actually be able to deliver some moisture in here. It's a very dry pattern right now, and temperature anomalies from the 23rd through the 30th are looking even warmer than what I showed you just a little while ago. So certainly a warmer than average and drier than average pattern, I think, is the way to go, at least over the next couple of weeks. And if you have any type of travel plan through the region, again, tomorrow and into the Thursday, that wind is probably going to be your most noticeable problem area really over the next couple of weeks. Other than that, it's just warm and dry. Let's look at our European extended model forecast. This would go from December 30th through the 29th. And I always use this model with the preface that take it with a grain of salt, but there are some things to glean from it as to why this same type of weather pattern that we're dealing with right now might actually continue. This is the forecast upper level weather pattern that's going to prevail for that 30-day period. And what we have going on is a ridge of high pressure here over the Bering Sea and up over the Aleutian Islands. So your weather pattern goes up like this, down like this, and down like this. All right, that's across Canada. Farther south, you see these lines and how flat they are coming in here. That essentially means we have a lot of Pacific flow coming in here. And whenever we have Pacific flow, that's a warmer than average pattern for us in Kansas and across the midsection of the country. Now, that being said, this blue shaded area up here is where all the snow and the cold has been pooled up. So in January, and as we progress forward into February, could we get a flow that does something like this and dump some of that Arctic air into our state? Yeah, absolutely we can. All right, there will be cold fronts still come through, but when you're seeing a pattern like this, it certainly favors a warmer than average outlook during that period of time. And that's exactly what the temperature anomaly forecast offers. In fact, as I said, this goes from the 28th through the 30th, or the 30th through the 29th, I should say. And you can see all these warmer than average temperature anomalies across not only Kansas, but across the entire midsection of the country, where some of these anomalies are as high as 6 degrees above average. And these take into account nighttime lows and daytime highs. But the overarching theme here is it screams warmer than average because of the weather pattern that I just showed you. From a precipitation anomaly standpoint, it's probably going to end up drier than average for a majority of the state too. Now, if you look at these anomalies, I don't necessarily want you to focus on the individual numbers, but just focus on the trend. Even outside of this brown shaded area that I'm highlighting right here, there's nothing that's terribly high end to get excited about. Maybe we have some slight positive anomalies across the far eastern part of the state, but I really think the wetter than average conditions will be to the northwest and also the farther east you go. And that's a very typical weather pattern with a La Nina event that we currently have in progress right now. So certainly the farther west and southwest you go, those drier anomalies are going to be a little bit stouter than areas farther east, which, if nothing else, have a better shot to at least get clipped by a couple of storm systems that may come through. But we've seen this song and dance before with this type of setup, and it usually paves the way for those drier and warmer than average conditions to continue at least a little while longer. So you heard me mention about the La Nina event. So let's look at the current state of these oceans, and our La Nina is still kicking right here. That's what all that blue shaded area is across the equatorial Pacific there just to the west of South America. We've got the Pacific, North Pacific, which is slightly warmer than average right now, the North Atlantic, which is slightly cooler than average right there, and we have the Indian Ocean, which is actually warming up. So all of these different areas that I have highlighted are integral in what our weather pattern is going to shape up. And historically, anytime we have this little pocket of cooler than average water here in the North Atlantic pairing up with a La Nina, a lot of times the Western High Plains and even into some parts of the Central Plains can have dry conditions during the winter. And that's kind of the pattern that is really set up shop, at least for right now. What this La Nina is going to do is continue for a while. So this is a trade wind forecast from December 17th right through the end of this month. And all of this blue and green represents enhanced easterly trade winds. After we get past about the 27th, you see the green kind of go away down here, and those trade winds lighten up just a little bit. But if nothing else, what these easterly trade winds are going to do is maintain the current strength of La Nina and maybe even strengthen it just a little bit more. The thing that I'm noticing besides all that green and blue is we really don't have any dark oranges or reds that are sustained doing this. Those would be westerly wind bursts. And a lot of times big westerly wind bursts can take a lot of that warm water that's pooled up in the Western Pacific and shove it east and bring about an abrupt end to this La Nina event. I don't see that happening at least through the end of this month. But beyond that, that's when I think we'll start to see some changes take place. What I want you to look at in this graphic is it represents from west to east across the Pacific and from top down. So over here on the left side, I want you to think of this as Australia. And over here on the right side, think of this as South America. And then we go from 0 down to 450 meters. So all of this blue shading, okay, that's cooler than average sea surface temperatures that actually drop down to about 150 meters. Over here on the west side of the Pacific, that is all warmer than average water that has really been pooling up over there. And once those easterly trade winds come to an end, what happens is this warmer than average water can slosh back eastward and it puts an end to our La Nina event. That's really how this ebb and flow works together across the Pacific with this wax and wane as far as La Nina and El Nino are concerned. So while we have La Nina going on right now, there are a lot of signs not only in the ocean, but in the atmosphere that suggest this La Nina is probably going to go away fairly quickly as we head into 2026. And if you look at this map right here, or this graphic, you could see that back in late December, or late November, I should say, we peaked with this La Nina event. It went down to a negative 1.3 degrees, which is about a moderate event. And then since then, we weakened it a little bit. And then recently, with that enhanced burst of easterly trade winds, we've kind of come back down a little bit. So right now, we're situated at a negative 1.1, which firmly puts us in the weak category to maybe even weakly moderate with the way things are behaving in the atmosphere. The next couple of weeks, as I said, this will likely maintain its strength and maybe even strengthen a little more. But after that, this computer model forecast, looking at those sea surface temperature anomalies, all of these different red lines are different members of the European model, which I use all the time. And even if we were to take just the mean of all of those lines, that's what we end up with. All right, we've got some higher end stuff up here, lower end stuff here, but at minimum, this model takes almost every single one of these members to above the 0 line by the time we get toward May. And for those of you that may not know, anything that's above a positive 0.5 degrees Celsius is technically considered in El Nino territory. So right now, we're down here, all right? But after we get past, say, the rest of this month and January, you know, we see the equatorial Pacific change in a big way, and very quickly too. And the last time this happened was in late 22 and 23, where 3 years ago at this time, we were firmly in La Nina territory. And by the spring of 23, we were in El Nino territory. And that's really how I think this is going to unfold, very similarly to what we saw in 2023. And it's really important because this type of oceanic transition is also likely going to coincide with the seasonal change. And that can many times produce some pretty significantly active weather in the middle part of the country. Is this transition and how it's going to unfold completely a done deal? No. Is the move from La Nina toward El Nino likely a done deal? I firmly think so. The timing on it may slide just a little bit here and there, but I think the trend is going to be our friend going forward. And if you put that graph that I showed you into a more easy to understand concept here, I want you to watch this area right here, because that's where our La Nina is going. That's our sea surface temperature anomaly animation from now right through June. And you can see how abruptly it changes, and not just how abruptly it changes, but how strong of anomaly, warm anomaly, really starts to show up, especially by the month of May. All right. And during that whole time, you know, the North Pacific is generally staying warm. The North Atlantic is generally staying cool right there. So the real change here, in addition to the Indian Ocean over here, which warms up, is right here in that ENSO region to the west of South America. Okay. So just some key ENSO points, takeaways here. Okay. This La Nina event's likely peaked, and it'll likely be gone by late January, early February. Our ENSO neutral window, where we're in neither La Nina or El Nino, will probably be short before we gradually make that move toward El Nino. And it appears at least weak El Nino conditions will start to prevail late spring into summer. It's always tough to determine how strong something like this is going to be after we exit La Nina. But as I said, I think at least weak El Nino or something similar to what we dealt with back in 23 is going to be the way to go, at least for now. And something that you're going to hear a lot about, whether you're consuming weather information online or from the Weather Service or from another entity, a lot of outlets really like to blame and give too much credit to La Nina and El Nino events. They are table setters for our seasonal forecast, but there are other elements at play that go into what a La Nina or an El Nino may or may not mean for us. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, that while they are table setters, every El Nino and every La Nina is different, and they can oftentimes produce different weather patterns versus their predecessors. All right, so that's something to keep in mind. Let's go ahead and go into our Euro seasonal model forecast here. This is the temperature anomaly forecast from January to June. So for the month of January, we continue with this same kind of pattern. And remember what I showed you a little while ago with the weather pattern predominantly coming in from the Pacific like this across the southern tier of the country. But farther north, you still have that slice of colder than average air that can drop readily southeastward out of Canada. So your gradient really increases here from, say, southwest Iowa to southwest Kansas. That area right there, you're probably going to see some pretty huge temperature gradients, much like we've already seen at times at the end of this year from across the Midwest to the Southwest. If we go to February, we're still there, okay? A little less than what it was, but that signal is still there. And January and February can produce some pretty significant Arctic outbreaks, all right? So that's why I said, while the overall pattern shoves this stuff to our northeast, we will get cold fronts that inevitably dump cold air into our backyard. I just think that the farther northeast you go, the more harsh that cold air will likely end up being. But we'll have to see how this plays out. If we go into March, we start to see a pretty significant pocket of warmer than average temperatures out here across the Great Basin and into the Intermountain West. That is probably a testament to a lot of that cold air remaining being dumped farther to our northeast. All right, but that's something to watch. April, same thing. The warmest situation is farther west. May, look at this, still warmer than average out here, but right here in the midsection of the country, we are at basically average, okay, is right where we are. If we look at June, not a whole lot of warmth on top of us. Most of that real warm stuff is still situated out there to our west, okay? I don't want to see a lot of early spring warmth across Kansas or really anywhere here in the midsection of the country, because if we see that, that usually means that we are drier than average and that our soil is drier than average. Well, right now, a lot of us have a full profile, none of that to worry about, but we all know how quickly it can change. So that heat signal is still something to watch out for. The Euro seasonal model precipitation anomaly forecast from January through June looks like this. So this is for January. Wetter than average, again, to the northwest, also east. But in general, what this paints for Kansas is average precipitation across majority of the state, with the east and southeast having a slight tip to above average. I still think that you could probably draw drier than average conditions across the southwest part of the state. We've seen this pattern before. That's usually what prevails with something like that. But let's keep in mind, January really isn't a very wet month for us anyway. All right. So usually not a time to think of big storms coming in. February, that signal shows up again, where we are wetter east. So you can see the eastern half of Kansas right there in the green. Okay. And then the western half of Kansas, pretty much average to below average right there. But whenever I see dryness in California, Arizona, New Mexico, that usually means that the western part of the region ends up being drier, with areas farther east being wetter. We saw a very similar thing like this earlier this year, okay, when we had basically the same type of pattern. March, same story, okay? Even some of that dryness pokes its way out here into the central part of the United States, all right? Right here across the majority of Kansas, eastern Colorado, the panhandles, all right? But keep in mind, during this time, at least through March, we're probably in neutral ENSO. We're not in El Nino yet. I really think the big move in those sea surface temperature anomalies takes place in April. And April changes quite a bit on our precipitation anomaly map. You can see virtually all of Kansas is above average. I don't think that little bit of brown there means anything. I would paint probably this whole area, okay, as above average precipitation. The European model did it last month. It's on board this month. The one change that it made this month versus last is it tends to dry things out a little bit here in May. All right. And I really don't know why, because you have wetter than average in Nebraska, wetter than average to the south, and also to the west. If we shove water in the ground in May, and quite a bit of it, I still think the month of May will probably have a tip toward wetter than average for the majority of the state. And in June, you see the majority of that dry signal go away, and we replace it with some green. So again, I think still for the spring and early summer, the midsection of the country, after we get past March, has a pretty good shot to see some pretty good moisture during that 3-month period. And while that's happening, and this is interesting for down the road, that early heat signal that I showed you out here in the Great Basin and the Intermountain West, if that comes to fruition, a lot of times it can spur an earlier than average monsoon plume that comes out of Mexico. And you see the green showing up here across Arizona and western New Mexico. That is associated with that early monsoon. So down the road, that monsoonal moisture does have an impact across the western half of Kansas. Maybe not so much for folks in the eastern side of the state, but for the western part. So this would be a good signal that if we can get this monsoon to go early, that it puts more moisture in the flow and it helps us out a little bit down the road. Whether you're in the green or not, what I want you to recognize here is that as we head into the warm season, there's not this giant, awful brown signal across the middle part of the country. There will be some areas that are no doubt drier than others, but after we get past March, there are some things to like here, in my opinion. And I think we'll continue to see that trend going forward. All right. So let's take a step back from the models for a second. And what I've done is I went back through history and I've cherry picked 6 recent years, really the only 6 years that I think are going to apply to the March through August period of 2026. All right. These are analogs and they're never perfect, but I think they have a lot to show us today. So we're going to look at those temperature and precipitation anomaly analogs for 2026, March through August. We'll start with March. Temperature anomalies. These are the years that I have for you. 51, 65, 72, 02, 09, and 23. I think the ones that are most important are the most recent ones of 09 and 23. And when you average all of these temperature anomalies together for those years, you get a late season cold signal for the month of March. It's especially notable here north of Kansas, but even across Kansas, that late season cool air has a tendency to come down. So see, this is the difference between analyzing history and the model data. Because remember, the model data was showing the primary influence being up here to the north, but history shows us we can still have some of those late season cold bursts come down. Why might that bother me? Well, if we go through a dry January, February, and we have it warm during that period of time, that wheat is going to go to work on that subsoil moisture. And we obviously don't want our wheat being any taller than it needs to be in March if we have some late season cold coming down. So that's something that we always have to be cognizant of if we have a full profile and we're moving through January and February and it's warmer than it should. It can get that wheat to growing a little faster than maybe we should like. So we have to keep that in mind. History also shows us for the average precipitation anomalies of those years in March that we were drier than average right there in the middle part of the country. And I showed you that the European model also had that dry signal kind of moving out here in the middle part of the country. So if we have history and a model kind of showing the same thing, that obviously gives our forecast at least a little bit more confidence there. What about April? April still shows some of that cold signal coming down, but it's basically removed from Kansas. We're starting to see those sea surface temperature anomalies flip, and that starts to aid in the warmth that shows up here across the south and the southwest part of the country, and really even over here in the southeast. Precipitation anomalies, we were generally just average here, but you don't see any widespread dryness here in the middle part of the country. If I were to take out 2002, we moistened things up here in the midsection quite a bit. 2002 was a very dry spring across the midsection of the country, and it really does tip the scale. But even factoring that in, history doesn't show us there's a whole lot to worry about here across Kansas for the month of April. What about May? May, temperature-wise, nothing too warm, nothing too cool. All right. If we look at precipitation anomalies, nothing to worry about in Kansas either. In fact, we've got some wetter than average conditions showing up across parts of the middle of the country. And I think that's a testament to the shift, what those sea surface temperature anomalies are going to do. So for May, I'm still not overly concerned for Kansas right now. Some dryness here across northeast Oklahoma, which is interesting, but for most of Kansas, we're okay. What about June? Let's look at that. And some of the Junes in these years were wild across the West, because what we had a very persistent trough of low pressure here across the Western United States in a lot of these Junes. And one of those years was 1965, and it was really wet during that time. But we'll worry about that in a second. What having this trough across the West does is it keeps things cooler than average. So the temperature anomaly forecast, or at least from the analog standpoint, keeps us average to cooler than average across Kansas for the month of June. And precipitation anomalies, it was wet. All of those years pretty much ended up being wet, and in some cases very wet across central and southwest Kansas. Meanwhile, we're striking out down here across Texas and also across parts of the Midwest. So it's interesting in some of these years is that initially in the first part of the year, everything was biased farther east when that La Nina signal was present. And by everything, I mean the wetter than average conditions. But after that La Nina goes away and we shift toward an El Nino, everything gets biased a little bit farther to the west. We saw this in 2023 when the western part of Kansas was crazy active. It was cooler than average. It was wetter than average. We had hail start in April and end in September, but the eastern part of Kansas was dry and hot during that summer. So I think that that's something we have to watch out for. But at least through June, I think we're doing okay. July showed up cooler than average through this sector in all these years and really warmer than average in this sector. All right. Precipitation anomalies, we still didn't have too much to worry about. And I think that that'll hold true if we shove water in the ground here in April, May, and June. It's pretty hard to just completely shut things off if you're wetter for those 3 months. Not saying it can't happen. It's just pretty rare. August, we were still cooler than average in the average of all of those years together, and we were warmer south. All right. But Kansas was still average to cooler than average in August of all of those years when averaged out. And precipitation anomalies, we were still doing okay. All right. We were drier to the southeast of the state, but not across Kansas. So in all of those analogs that I just showed you, really the only month that shows up drier than average in those analogs was the month of March. And then after that, things were actually in pretty good shape. And I know many of you that I talk to, we will talk about 2009 being a wetter year, certainly. And then 23 for a good part of the state, especially farther west, was also wetter. But in 23, we shut things off later in the summer. The later we went into the year, we shut some things off. So we have to kind of, pay attention to those balances as we look at these analogs too. Okay, that's what I have for you today, guys. If you've got questions for me, please feel free to ask.
Thank you for all that information, Brian. Really appreciate it. It's pretty good insights as we head into the holidays. And then, as we get deeper into this crop year. One of the questions I got text was that last year I had good results planting early. Do you see that as being harder or easier to accomplish again this year? Obviously, pretty early to speculate on that, but what's your thoughts right now?
Well, I think it depends on which side of the state you're on. But if we obviously have moisture to work with in the ground right now, and to me that's a game changer because off and on over the past several years we haven't had that luxury. So if you've got the moisture and you keep that moisture coming, I don't have a problem with planting early. I know a lot of folks worry about that if they plant early in that moisture and then things shut off, as we race to the finish line to finish that crop, it would have been better to maybe plant later. So I think to a question like that, we have to work through at least for the first couple of months of the year, and then we can also go from there. But as I said, I think it really depends on what side of the state that you're on too, and then we'll see how the El Nino either starts up sooner or starts up a little bit later, and we can kind of massage those planting windows as we get a little bit closer in time.
And just circling back, in that May, June, typically maybe a little more of a thunderstorm type season. Are you seeing potentially a higher chance for hail this year, or maybe just kind of looking at still average?
If we shove water in the ground early, I am always more concerned about hail than any other time. And the reason that is because if we keep that moisture in the soil, then that moisture in the soil gets evaporated out and it's thunderstorm fuel. So historically speaking, when we make this pivot from a La Nina toward an El Nino, it usually means more active severe weather season in the middle part of the country than not. And if you go back to what happened in 2023, as I said, really the western third of the state, or almost western half of the state, had to deal with severe weather from April to September of that year. And we saw so much hail that year. And a lot of that was due to a lot of the moisture that went in the ground, early in the spring that kind of carried us through the summer. So yes, I would say that this upcoming season could be a little more dialed up in terms of hail.
So one of the things that I was, watching the news the other day, looked like for really much of the country as we go through this holiday season, probably won't see precipitation through, east to west, north to south.
Yeah, I think the better moisture is going to be confined out in California and across the Pacific Northwest and the Northwest Rockies. This pattern that we have right now has this ridge of high pressure coming north out of the Gulf of America and Mexico, really shutting off the midsection of the country, but the more active weather is going to be situated out on the Pacific coast. They're going to get slammed pretty good with rain and snow out there for sure, which, to be honest, they need it because it's been a slow start for them out there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Once again, Brian, thank you for everything. For everybody that's listening, feel free to reach out with questions. With our partnership with Brian, if you got questions about other items, other areas, feel free to reach out to me and we can get some of those questions answered. So everybody have a Merry Christmas and we'll see you next month.
You guys too. Take care.